Almost the end of the month, my allergy season is almost over, and so what better occasion to celebrate by talking about a dumb horror movie from the 50s.
The Screaming Skull is a motion picture that reaches its climax in shocking horror. Its impact is so terrifying that it may have an unforeseen effect. It may kill you. Therefore, its producers feel they must assure free burial services to anyone who dies of fright while seeing The Screaming Skull. Be sure to bring someone with you who can identify you when you see The Screaming Skull. Only this lost soul, half man, half ghost, knows the secret of the living dead's curse. The torturous agony that saturates these walls and makes the shutters creak with almost human pain. Terrorizing those who dare to love with the maddening, jealous shriek of the Screaming Skull.
Today we're going to be talking about an independent movie. I checked, it's from a very small company. It didn't have any big studio backing from something like Universal or any of those kind of big studios at the time that usually put out horror movies. So yeah, this is a kind of an indie movie of the time. It's a black and white horror movie from 1958, and most people probably know about this movie because it was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000. So yeah, that kind of lets you know that this is it's one of those cheesy movies that's real easy to make fun of. Newlyweds Eric and Jenny retire to his desolate mansion where Eric's first wife, Marion, died from a mysterious freak accident. Jenny, who has a history of mental illness, begins to see strange things, including a mysterious skull, which may or may not be a product of her imagination. Suspicion falls onto Mickey, the estate's mentally challenged gardener, who was seemingly very attached to his former mistress. And interestingly of note, this movie has a disclaimer in the opening that anyone who dies of fright from this movie will receive a free coffin. Because yes, they really thought this movie was so terrifying, you'd actually need a coffin in case you died of fright from this movie. Now, they don't really specify if you die of laughter. That they don't specify. Who knows? Maybe they got a discount or something. The movie is about newlyweds Eric and Jenny, and they go back to Eric's old house that he had with his last wife, who they say died when she walked by their pond and she slipped on a stone when it was raining and she cracked her head open. I think that's what they say.
Perhaps she slipped on a leaf. Base of her skull was smashed. It was thought that she hit her head on the edge of the cement wall where we're sitting. And she fell in there. She died in the water.
And so that's some foreshadowing in one of the many scenes in this movie where people are walking around the exterior of the house and talking, because the first half of this thing is pretty much dialogue heavy. Very early on, they also established that Jenny has a history of mental illness. She was in an institution, and they say it was brought upon because she saw her parents drown. And they also later on say that she had a better relationship with her father than her mother. And to make things even more confusing, very early on they show this painting of Eric's last wife, Marion, and Jenny says that it looks a lot like her mother. So, what? But first I'm thinking, okay, so is that to imply that Eric killed her parents? And that he lied about the painting being of his last wife when in reality it was her mother, and he's trying to kill her family. First thing they do when they get to the house is Eric nonstop talks about his last wife, as if that was something that he never ever talked about when he started going out with Jenny before they got married. And also, how weird is that? You get back to your house, and yeah, they say that it was his last house from his last marriage, and they're trying to get new furniture in. By the way, as far to my knowledge, furniture never shows up. That was really weird. Every time they go into the living room, it's barren. There's nothing there. He just keeps going on about his dead wife. Again, as if that's something they never talked about before. They show this painting, and Jenny says that it looks a lot like her mother, whatever that's supposed to mean. And outside of the house, there's this pyramid thing with flowers and stuff around it that has a built-in bust of the wife's head. And that obviously comes back into play later. After this very long opening scene where they're just having lengthy expository dialogue sessions with their friends, They're about to go to bed, but then Jenny hears something in the middle of the night. She goes out, wanders through the hallway, one of the many long scenes of characters walking through hallways, and added bonus of knocking on door sound effect, and then they slowly walk to the door instead of just answering it right away. Then he gets a vision of the skull, and we get to see the very sloppy editing work at play here, because this movie is laced to the brim with jump cuts. Like, even the first Birdemic didn't have this many jump cuts. It's one thing that a lot of us YouTubers do jump cuts, but I mean, it's just a format that a lot of people have gotten used to. Apparently, when you're a YouTuber and you do vlog videos like this, you can get away with doing jump cuts. Movies, especially movies from back then, they're not known for using jump cuts. Every time there was a jump cut in this movie, though, it just kept making me think of the It's Always Sunny episode where they had Lethal Weapon 5. And there's that sloppy jump cut edit where they're trying to blow out the candles of the cake and they can't do it. But anyway, after the jump cut of Jenny panicking, and then it just jump cuts to her in Eric's arms as Eric shows up to comfort her, they basically start to establish that the skull is after Jenny. And, like, she looks out the windows, they see these peacocks that are in their like area. Like, they set up that there are peacocks there, and there's one of the many long scenes of her looking at things and being terrified. She looks out the window and the peacocks just look around. Next day, as Eric leaves, he tells Jenny to talk to Mickey for a little bit. Mickey talks a little bit about his relationship with Eric's last wife and says that, you know, him and her really got along, and that that there might be something foul at play here.
I'm sure it was a great loss to all of you, Mickey.
She cries.
Cries?
In the night.
Dead people don't cry, Mickey.
I heard her.
Gee, could it possibly be that maybe Eric is the one responsible for this and that Mickey was just there to fake out the audience? I highly doubt they'd ever pull a cliched ending like that. It seems to be taking Eric forever to get home. Jenny tries to go to sleep, but then she hears more noise. So then she goes wandering through the halls, finds a skull in this like cabinet out in the hallway. She tosses the skull out the window. And just as she thinks she's home free, we then get this scene where I guess the skull comes to life. Because then they show this POV shot where like it's heading towards the door. And you know what? If it was in any other movie, it actually would have been pretty effective, because it's like, okay, POV shots are something I typically like in a lot of like creepy horror movies like this. So I liked that aspect of it. But I mean, the fact that it's just a singular skull that later on seems like it only gets around through sloppy editing or being rolled across the floor by a stagehand off screen, it's just kind of silly. And the fact that it's screaming, because the title is The Screaming Skull, I mean, it makes a noise. It sounds like a really loud door creaking or like a really loud car alarm. Don't worry, the movie makes up for that because Jenny screams a lot. Then Jenny ends up passing out on the floor because she answers the door after hearing a lot of loud knocking, and then she opens it and sees that it's the skull who's miraculously moved from the spot she threw it in to the front door, which is implying that the skull was knocking on the door. Either we can chalk it up to it's all in her head, or it's some kind of spirit that was able to do it. I don't know. Next morning she wakes up and Eric is there and says that he found her passed out on the floor. And so he decides that he's going to try and get rid of all skull-related things in the house. Like, they go looking for the skull that she threw out the window, but they can't find it. After they go looking for the skull with their pastor friend, and this is where Jenny talks about how her parents died and her relationship with them and how all that stuff relates. They decide they can't find the skull, so they chalk it up as maybe it was just all in her head, and maybe she should go back to the mental institution, but like they're just like talking about that. That all comes back into play in the third act. So Eric decides to get rid of all the stuff around the house that reminds her of Marion, his dead wife. He tries setting it on fire, and he keeps suspecting that it was Mickey behind all of this. And we get one of the many scenes where, again, they're just walking around the exterior of the house, and then they talk to Mickey for a little bit.
What are you going to do with that skull?
Stop it, it wasn't his
Where did you
fault.
get it?
Leave him alone.
I'll take care of this, Jenny. Now, I know you don't like me, Mickey. I know you do anything to get us to leave here. This idiotic attempt to scare us as if we were children. It was you, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
No, not me, not me.
There's a lot of that in the first half of this movie. This movie may not be as boring as something like Manos: The Hands of Fate, but that's not saying much because there's lots of scenes of characters just either talking a lot or people just walking around. You know what? For old 50s horror movies, I kind of expect that. A lot of, great or not so great 50s horror movies were known for that kind of thing. I mean, the reason that a lot of old movies did that was because it was the 50s. It wasn't a very, special effects heavy time versus nowadays where a lot of cases, special effects are the things that carry the movies through. And there's lots of movies that use this to varying effect back in the day. You look at the original version of The Thing, or Fiend Without a Face is another really good example of that. There was the movie with those brain creatures that had like spinal cord tails and like antennae. It was actually really good. They didn't have that happen till like the last 15 minutes of the movie, but again, that's because they were trying to build suspense and because they couldn't have special effects all throughout the thing. And you know what? For a movie like that, that works totally fine. And you get to movies that either remember the title or you don't really remember all that fondly if you do remember them. Like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Lots of dialogue-heavy scenes in that. And the woman becoming giant and rampaging through the city, that doesn't happen until like the last 10, 15 minutes. Last half an hour of this movie is actually where it gets kind of interesting, because that's when it's revealed that Eric is the one behind all of it, and he's been blaming it on Mickey. Even in that regard, you set up something interesting, and they don't really go into a lot of depth with it. Okay, you establish that this painting of his dead wife kind of looks like Jenny's mom. And they established that she died near a pond. And you reference that her parents were drowned. So maybe he's trying to kill her family? Maybe he just lied saying that it was a painting of his dead wife and it was really a painting that her father made of her mother. And so that's why it looks like her. And there's also a throwaway line at the beginning that said that Jenny was from a relatively rich family, so it's like maybe he's trying to marry her so then he can get her inheritance and then kill her off and get all the money to himself. They don't really go into anything like that. He's just some nonchalant asshole who likes psychologically torturing his wife and then eventually killing her, I guess. At that point in the movie, there's tons of scenes where he chokes her out, and they even show that he's trying to make a noose before eventually he gets his comeuppance, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, it's not really clear as to what his motivation for doing any of this is. I guess he's just some sick fuck that gets off psychologically torturing his wives and then killing them. Later on in the movie, they burn the picture and Jenny sees the skull again, and then Eric just chokes her out, and then it turns out that he planted it there. Because again, he has very confusing motivation as to what he's doing. Does he want to kill Jenny? Does he just want to psychologically torture her and send her back to the mental institution? Whatever. Mickey notices all of this. He tells Mickey to stay out of it. He tells their friends, the pastor and his wife. So later that night, they agree that they're going to send Jenny to the mental institution, but they decide that, something's fishy, so they're going to try and see what happens. So later that night, as Jenny goes out to try and say goodbye to Mickey, she then, I guess this is a vision, or maybe it was set up by Eric, I don't know, because she goes wandering to look for Mickey to say goodbye to him before she leaves. And then there's a skeleton in, I guess it was supposed to be a wedding dress or maybe a nun outfit. It kind of looks like a beekeeper suit, but yeah, skeleton is there and it chases after her. And one of the many examples of really unintentionally hilarious sounding music. For example, the opening credits music sounds like, I don't know, German Oompa band music. They have a tuba and it just sounds really silly. And later at the end when Eric has his comeuppance, there's like a xylophone, and it makes it sound like, you know, like Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny hijinks music. Anyway, as Eric's making this noose, Jenny runs into the house, he chokes her out, and then he hears knocking. He goes down, and I guess it turns out that the skull and the ghost are real, because, yeah, it shows up as a skeleton in what looks like a beekeeper suit, and then he just picks up a stool and throws it across the room, and the skeleton just breaks into a bunch of pieces. It wasn't supposed to be funny, but it just made me laugh because it's such a silly looking visual. But so yeah, the skull is real, I guess. So I guess it is the vengeful spirit of his dead wife coming to kill him, because then it shows him running around and there's like a bunch of skulls like biting his hand and stuff, and then eventually like stock footage of lightning happens and he's dead, I guess. And then yeah, the pastor and his wife show up. They put Jenny in their car. Do they take her to the mental institution, or do they just kind of leave? Whatever. And then Mickey like looks out at the pond. That was another thing they established, that Mickey talks to the pond at night, you know, because he thinks that it's the dead wife. And he basically says something along the lines of like, "They're gone, you can now rest in peace," or something.
They're gone. Rest.
So yeah, this movie is not very good, and I am totally fine with a lot of old school, kind of cheesy horror movies. Like, even if you look back on the classics, you could definitely look back on a lot of black and white horror movies. You can take them or leave them. Like, the ones that are really good, you know, the original Draculas, the original Frankensteins, original Wolfmans, the OG Universal monster movies, those are good. The ones that kind of waver in between, you know, there's definitely the good ones you can pick through and the bad ones you can pick through. This is definitely one of the bad ones, at least to me, because, yeah, like, it's a movie that maybe on paper was an interesting concept, but, I mean, like, some of the acting is very wooden, and, like I said, the first, like, half, if not the first 2/3, are just kind of boring. And I'm fine with horror movies that have a lot of dialogue-heavy scenes. A lot of old movies from back in the 50s were very dialogue-heavy. It's just that you have to make the dialogue compelling and the characters interesting, but unfortunately everything just kind of comes off as repetitive after a while, and there's tons of gaps between dialogue, so it's real easy for you to just, like, you know, just add your own little quips in between to try and make fun of the movie. I will say the last 15 minutes is probably the most entertaining part, because that's when you get all the stupid shit with the skull attacking Eric and stuff like that. And there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's tons of points where they could have had a really compelling story and they just don't go into that much depth with it. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the Screaming Skull. It's bad, but I mean, if you want a dumb, cheesy, public domain movie from the 50s to make fun of, this isn't a bad choice. So that does it for the Blockbuster videos for this month. Look forward to next month. We're going to have, hopefully, 2 or 3 more episodes. I might try and do a movie marathon video like I usually do on the second channel, but I might try to change the format for that a little bit. As for whatever else, you can expect reviews of typical schlocky, crappy kind of movies. You know, some dumb horror movies, hopefully some dumb action movies. Hopefully I can find some of those. Who knows? We haven't done one of these in a while. Maybe we can talk about one of those, you know, live action cartoon adaptation movies, because I haven't talked about one of those in a while. We'll have to wait and see what the schedule looks like for next month. But until then, guys, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.
Oh, the film broke and it was horrible.